Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May 2024 edition of the Watch Club. We're the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival here in Massachusetts. I am Program Director James Sullivan, and we are very excited to have the co-directors of the new documentary, Carol Doda, Topless at the Condor, which just started streaming, I believe, this week or maybe at the end of last week, very recently. So thanks for joining us. We always play the trailer before we invite the filmmakers on, for those of you who might be watching but have not had a chance to watch the film yet, just to bring you up to speed. We'd like to do that now, and then we'll bring on co-directors Jonathan Parker and Marlo McKenzie, and take a look at the trailer for Carol Doda, Topless at the Condor.
This is an extraordinary moment in American history.
It was the beginning of a whole new world.
San Francisco is a happening town.
I want to be in show business, and I don't know any other way but to start showing my business.
Carol Doda and the Condor Club usher in this era of topless dancing.
It was a sensation.
She was brave enough to do something no one had done before.
This isn't your usual costume, is it?
Oh, well, I don't think so. Do you?
She made an international name for herself.
I give them a fantasy, which people need.
We ended up getting busted.
The city shut the clubs down.
Carol Doda was saying, my body is the art, and the performance is going to go on.
These girls are so bad they got arrested. Let's go see them.
Why is everybody becoming so puritanical? Are they afraid of the body?
People went absolutely wild when she did this.
A lot of rules were being broken.
She changed our thinking about something as personal and basic as nudity.
Please welcome to the Watch Club, Marlo McKenzie and Jonathan Parker, co-directors of this film. Hi, Marlo. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hi, James.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for kicking off Memorial Day weekend, and thanks for taking the time to spend with us talking about your film. So San Francisco is one of my favorite places. I just mentioned to you both that my wife and I lived there for 10 years or so in our younger years. I think we've all seen plenty of footage of sort of, freewheeling San Francisco in the later 60s, but this is such a unique take on the San Francisco story. I was really excited to watch it, and you did a great job with it. So congratulations. And I'm just wondering if you can begin by telling me, you started to tell me a few minutes ago before we went live, you want to tell me the story, both of you, about how this footage became this film.
Yeah, well, so Carol was famous for a couple of reasons, but mainly because she was the first topless dancer in 1964 at the Condor Club on Broadway Street in San Francisco. I met her decades later when she retired from dancing, and she opened a lingerie store on Union Street in San Francisco. And my office at the time, this was in the late 90s, happened to overlook a courtyard where her shop was. And,
okay.
I remember seeing her sign go up and go, "Oh, Carol Doda! Wow, okay," because she was very famous, and I was an aspiring filmmaker at the time, and so I started hanging out with her, and we got along really well, and I started pitching her the idea of doing a movie about her life, and so she let me follow her around. She was doing kind of MC, master of ceremonies type public appearances, and she was singing in a little jazz combo.
Right.
And so, we worked on it together for a number of months, and ultimately, it didn't happen at that time. And so I had compiled a bunch of material and written a bunch of material, and just basically, put it in a file in my office. And then 20 years later, Marlo came to work with me to help me deliver a film that I had finished, which is kind of a technical, complicated process. And after that limited thing was over, she was looking around the office and found the file of my Carol Doda project and became intrigued.
Mm-hmm. She stumbled on your footage of all this and said, "What do you got going on here?" Right? But Marlo, please, I think it's super important that there's a woman's voice as part of the filmmaking process. This would have been probably a very different film had Jonathan produced it himself without you. Is that safe to say?
Well, based on his notes, yes. But we did go in a very different direction, although his vision was for a fiction film, so that makes sense that it was, his notes were different. But yeah, I think the timing was just kind of perfect. You know, I had found his notes just after Me Too, so it was around 6 or 7 years ago. And yeah, I am definitely interested in feminist issues, so that was a bonus that I could help to bring that in. And but yeah, I think when you watch it, you realize it's really in America, we haven't really told the history of sex work and sex workers and all these people who hadn't heard of Carol. They were so grateful as we traveled the country with the theatrical screenings to know about her. And I felt the same way when I discovered her in the drawer. Jonathan's notes. I was like, wow, who is this person? And so many issues that we can talk about because of this movie and thanks to Carol. So I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, exactly. And, you know, I think at one point in the film, one of the other former topless dancers that you interviewed much more recently, obviously, said something like, you know, well, that's the way we thought about things then. And, you know, we think about things differently now. And that's key to this whole film, isn't it? I mean, like, you do a great job, you both do, in this film of just showing how Carol and then the others who followed in her footsteps were expressing their ideas of sexual and feminist liberation. You know, if I want to dance like this, it's my body. I can do what I want, right? But we definitely sort of, 60 years later, right, think about things in different terms. And you do it's a balancing act, I'm sure, because you're looking at the sort of permissiveness of that era of the mid 60s against how a younger generation of women might view that today. And you did an amazing job of striking that balance, I think, and describing how that might have changed over time. So those conversations, what were those conversations like between the two of you?
Well, I would, did you want to start? I'm just thinking about how things really haven't changed so much. They have changed a lot, but there are some ways in which they haven't. And that really came out in the movie. And the biggest thing is that sex workers are still stigmatized today. And that's something I think it just subtly is brought to the forefront through the movie. We weren't specifically trying to show that, but Carol, you know, you could see that she was stigmatized and she couldn't, like, for example, she couldn't become a partner at the Condor Club. And, you know, her breast size was never quite right for anyone. She was either too small in the beginning or too big at the end. And so there are certain things, and she had maybe dreams to be an actress. And perhaps because of her career, that was a little bit, she was, you know, put in this box of a dancer, so an sex worker kind of entertainer. So she couldn't break out of it, I think.
Right. I'll take a moment to say that if those of you who are watching live, if you want to ask a question of the filmmakers, please just feel free to type it into the chat, and we will get to it if we can. So please do that. So Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that? What Marlo just said about the issues that you discussed in terms of making the film?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to point out that Carol really was, you know, in 1964, the hippie thing hadn't happened yet, and Carol really was what I call part of the Rat Pack culture. So she was a big fan of Frank Sinatra and you know, that type of nightclub entertainment, and so she really was aspiring to be a nightclub entertainer. And then it's just from this sort of random confluence of incidents that occurred where, you know, the club owners, they can, you know, she was known for dancing on a piano. So they mounted the piano on the ceiling of the club so she could make this entrance, you know, as the piano was lowered, and she'd be dancing on top of it. So that was pretty novel. The clubs were all competing against each other for trying to do something different. And then they were trying to figure out how to get the convention business into the club, because the 1964 Republican convention was coming to San Francisco.
Right.
And then simultaneously, this topless bathing suit hit the market by a very famous fashion designer, Rudy Gernrich. And so the club publicist went down to the Union Square, and he bought one of these suits, and they publicized it. And, you know, it was a sensation. I mean, it was really, you know, a pretty shocking thing. And that was all preceding the hippie movement and the Summer of Love. So it was a really interesting and very quick, fast-moving cultural shift going on, you know, just over a course of really just a couple of years.
Right. There's so much great footage of the nightlife that you're talking about, and of the, you know, sort of police engagement with the community, and the various sort of like press, you know, discussions, you know, reporters trying to find out what Carol had to say, or what her publicist had to say, or what the owners had to say about all the attention they were getting. Where'd you find all that footage? I mean, you know, you'd had to dig deep somewhere, right? I mean, was most of that in archives for, you know, the local TV stations and things like that?
Yeah, so we had worked with a wonderful archival producer, Jen Petruccelli, and she's amazing, and she can find almost anything. But she did find things mostly in local news stations, and then the San Francisco State Archives, the UC Berkeley Archives. And then we had some kind of like surprise things that came to us, and Jonathan tells that story really well. We have a favorite story about, yeah.
Well, material started coming in from very, very off-the-wall directions. People heard we were making this movie, and one guy sent in a VHS videotape that he bought at an estate sale, and it was the person who died, whose estate it was, had been a television cameraman, and he had all this footage on this tape of Carol dancing at the Condor in the late '60s, and it's very, very difficult to find that kind of performance footage. You know, this was not an era where everybody was walking around with a movie camera in their pocket.
Right.
And so, you know, and it came in very late in the game. We were almost finished cutting the film, so we had to kind of rearrange things and make space for it. And, you know, it was a really nice addition coming in the last minute.
So you had to scramble to, you know, recut things, right, to include that stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah, when the priest footage came in, that interview with the priest, we really had to re-strategize the entire film to get as much as we could of that in there.
That's a bizarre sort of curiosity from a certain era, right? I mean, that's obviously early 70s. It's like this swinging looking set, and the priest is like this. They worked for the archdiocese in San Francisco, right? And he's like this, you know, hip, sideburn, you know, priest, right?
There were these hip priests,
yeah,
you know, in post hippie era, yeah,
right. Jonathan, you mentioned earlier the sort of monokini idea that was, you know, a short-lived, you know, fashion trend or sensation. But the one that inspired Carol to go topless at the beginning. And I'm fascinated by what some of the cultural historians have to say. And this might be you, Marlo, like sort of, I'm wondering, bringing in your perspective to bringing them on camera to talk about this thing, because one of them says, you know, fashion is never not political, basically. And then she proceeds to talk a little bit about how for women, you know, from corsets to, you know, not the, you know, the taboo against showing any, you know, a few inches of leg in the 20s or whatever, up till this idea of what Carol did, which was went topless for the first time because of this monokini. The historians are absolutely right. I mean, like, fashion is always political.
Oh, yes, definitely. And, you know, we were talking the other day about how ankles were one time the big sexy thing, and today also we can see in the news quite often about the actresses who are wearing sheer tops and how this is kind of a big thing. And we Jonathan and I had agreed from the beginning we didn't want the movie to be sensational, and so when we interviewed Sarah and Wednesday and Florence, we were not quite sure what we find in the interview, but they had the most enlightening things to share, like the fashion, as you're pointing out.
Right. So what were the conversations like as you were making the film in terms of staying away from the sensational? I mean, obviously there's a lot of nudity or toplessness in the footage, but in what ways did you want to contextualize? Did you talk together about contextualizing that so it would not come across as pure sensationalism?
Well, it was a little bit of a learning curve for me. What Marla would determine was crossing the sensational line. So I had that took me a while, and then I started to understand where she was coming from. And I think there is, this is a story about obviously a topless dancer, so it's not like you're not going to have nudity, but there is a way to and I think having the experts, having our writer PhD experts contextualize Carol was it's a super important part of the movie, because Carol was she was at a particular place at a particular time, subject to a lot of people people at the club coaxing her this way and coaxing her that way. And so, it's not like she, set out to be this sexual revolutionist, on her own. It was a kind of a team effort, but she, it was definitely, there were statements being made, there were political statements being made indirectly with that. And as one of our experts says, talking about the monokini, I think she always knew it was a weapon.
Oh, right. Great quote, right?
Yeah, I just add to the sensationalism. Jennifer J. Mayer, our amazing editor, she really helped with that, because when you think about film, the way you edit it can make it sensational or not. And so when she decided to cut away, it was like we weren't hanging on a shot so long that it began to feel like too much. Right. So that was a lot of it, and we didn't pick shots together that were just whoa. There were definitely things that we had of Carol that were just way over the top, just too much.
That you chose not to use.
We definitely curated the more classy nudes. So
right. And then another thing that really struck me was that, beyond the, sort of strip club atmosphere that obviously the film takes place in, there was so much talk, especially early on, about how the dancers themselves were sort of adopting the dance moves of sort of the American bandstand culture. And in many cases, we're doing moves like the swim. You talk, there's a guy who talks about the different dance moves that were fads in the early 60s, and how many of those, came under fire by sort of more prudish elements of the society for being too explicit, right? And it's just struck me as a little bit funny, because it's not that different today, 60 years later. I mean, several years ago when Miley Cyrus was doing the twerking thing, same people came out, same different generation, same people came out to say that's too vulgar, knock it off in public, right? That part, the whole, what kind of dancing is too risque. That conversation hasn't ended, right?
It started, even considerably earlier than our film, because I mean, if anybody's forgotten what Elvis was like when he first became famous,
sure. I
mean that kind of set a pretty high standard for sexualized dancing. So It's interesting how and the swim dance, of course, originated in San Francisco. So it was interesting to be able to use that. It's the dance she was doing when she made her first Topless descent on the piano, and so that was just kind of a cool angle to kind of include in there, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm well aware of Bobby Freeman because he was kind of like the first pop star from San Francisco. But then there's these guys who worked at the club, actually, right? George and Teddy, who I was not familiar with. I'm going to guess that those guys never recorded or didn't really record and get any kind of traction for the recordings that maybe they made. But they were famous, I guess, in their day for being the lead singers of the band that played at the strip club, right?
Well, they would tell you that they were the main attraction, and Carol was kind of the opening act. But George and Teddy, they did record a couple of records, but they were a cover singing duo, a Motown singing duo, doing cover songs. And so as Jerry Martini, who we interview in the movie, who was with Sly and the Family Stone for decades and decades, pointed out that, there was a ceiling on how big that act could get because they were not doing original material. So I think he pointed out that, the old Caesar's Palace was, the high watermark for that type of act. And Jerry turned it down to, as he says in the movie, to make $10 a night playing for Sly, in the original, Sly Stone group. So I think he probably made the right decision there.
Right. And that transition is great. I'm glad you mentioned the Sly Stone thing because you got some cool footage of them, that band, which obviously represented the later 60s in San Francisco extraordinarily well. And but that's a different story, but it's really fun to see that in the, that transition be made in the film. One person besides Carol that I want to ask about from the dancer's perspective is Judy Mamu, who seems like a real gem. Like, there's a lot of dancers who were sort of peers or associates of Carol's who dated back to almost her, her years, or some of them I think did. But Judy seems like like she was a lot of fun to talk to, and had some great opinions and some great recollections. She stands out as, nearly as, sort of charismatic as Carol was. Was she someone you've, tracked down early on? I mean, is she still sort of, any kind of a public figure around the Bay Area?
Well, Judy came through, so we actually had a team of researchers, and we found a photo of Judy just by accident. And then we tracked her down through that. So, Judy and Jimmy Mamu, their story is so incredible. And Judy, you're right. She's amazing, and she adds so much to the story. I think for the vulnerability she shared and what she went through with her breast injections was really transformative for the story. And we're just so grateful that she took part in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, she's such a great storyteller, and that's I think it's the case with a lot of our interview subjects is they're just really great storytellers, and nobody had ever asked them to tell their stories about their experiences in this era. So they were very excited to do it. And Judy definitely stands out. We brought her. She lives now, Judy and Jimmy, they live in Zihuatanejo, Mexico. They've been, together, they've been married for 60 plus years. And we brought her up for an interview in San Francisco. And then we went down there to interview both of them together. And she's a huge part of the story. And her nightclub act, dancing with snakes and and a monkey and fire eating, was just very indicative of how creative those acts were at that era of nightclub entertainment. So she was absolutely key part of the film.
Yeah, and but she's also just like a hot ticket, like she's hilarious and not apologetic at all. She's like, it's my life. If that's what I chose to do with it, that's on me, right? You don't get to say, right?
Definitely. And in the section of the interview, maybe where things we would have put in the film, if we could redo it, it might be the part where she was bitten by her snake. She was so dedicated that to her performance that she endured a snake biting. And she's just amazing. And her story, she has a book actually that we also based on her life, and there's so much more to her story. So,
and I'm sure there was a lot about Carol too, because Carol sort of paved the way for dancers like her to make a living, right?
Well, Judy and Carol came out. Judy was like
time, yeah.
the second person to go topless, as she says in the movie. So they were peers, and they would do each other's hair. But definitely, like, they were the two on the street who were aiming for this to be like professional. It wasn't just a side gig.
Yeah.
So they supported each other in that professionalism.
Right. So I want to wrap up on a note that might sound like a little bit of a downer, but I think it's an important one to mention. Towards the end of the film, there's a point where somebody's talking about how, women in entertainment have always been required to be held to a nearly impossible standard of body image. And somebody says, Lena Horne said, Lena Horne wasn't a stripper. She was a dancer and a singer, but she said, you have to have cast iron abs or a cast iron stomach or something like that. And Carol said, actually, you have to have a cast iron heart. And that struck me as, you go to lengths in the film to describe how her private life probably suffered because of her sort of utter devotion to this, elusive onstage celebrity that she sought, right? And she was a lonely person, and several different people say that. But when she said that thing about you have to have a cast iron heart, that struck me as like sort of a really sort of important thing to mention, but also, it's sad. I mean, it's a commentary on that, sort of pursuit of fame at the expense of everything else, right?
Well, showbiz is, a very tough business, and it's, her. So you're constantly. First of all, you're only going to be famous for a limited period of time, and in her case, there was she changed the shape of her body for her career, and it's that I think that takes a toll. She's had a lot of men come in and out of her life professionally and probably personally who were attracted because of her fame, and it's but in terms of loneliness for a performer, I think a lot of performers, that's not limited to people doing the kind of sexual performance that she was doing. Right. It's not an uncommon thing, and somebody you may even argue, well, what are they getting as as on-stage performers? They're getting a lot of attention that maybe they didn't get when they were little kids, and I think that's certainly the case for her and numerous other people.
All right, Marlo, do you want to jump in there?
Well, I would just quickly add that it is truly sad that her heart did close down to some extent because of her experiences, and it's very understandable. But I take heart in that she found the love of her life towards the end of her life,
right?
And she always had her love for her performance in whatever form she could. And so, as much as she went through, she did have things that she really loved at the end that seemed to kind of make up for the difficulty.
And what was the boyfriend's name at the end of her life?
Oh gosh, why am I blanking?
Yeah, no, I can't think of it either. But he was the co-owner of Gino and Carlo's, which is in North Beach, right? It's like a.
Well, he wasn't an owner there, but they both.
Oh, he was just a regular there.
And Jay North.
Thank you, Jay.
Jay North, yeah. So Gino and Carlo's is a fun little Italian restaurant in North Beach. So it's probably still there. Is that true?
Oh yeah.
It's a pub. It's is it a restaurant too?
Yeah, no, it's mostly a bar. I think you can.
Yeah.
There's some food there too, but yeah, she was a fixture there later, and he hung out there all the time, and so they met, and it was a really important relationship for her. Her only long-term relationship.
Yeah. All right, so we ended on an upswing. That's nice. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for making this film. It's a lot of fun. Carol Doda, Topless at the Condor. It's you can watch it if you haven't already on pretty much most of the streaming platforms, certainly Apple and Prime and YouTube. So check it out if you haven't already. If you haven't enjoyed it as I did, tell your friends. And Marlo and Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. And Marlo, we'll talk about your next film project, which we did before we came on air here. So thanks again, and have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Hey, thanks very much.
Thank you, James.
We'll take a second to thank our sponsors, and we'll see you next month in the Watch Club.